First off, I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine a company in the 1990s that had an arguably still unmatched level of critical, commercial, and cultural acclaim that would push them to be regarded as one of the most creative while globally appealing studios of its media, one that helped shape, due to its forward vision and technology, giving the public experiences and characters that would live in the hearts of the people for many, many years to come.
What studio am I talking about?
Following the monumental success of titles like Final Fantasy VII, Square began cementing their status as a capital B brand, expanding out of gaming, originating numerous Final Fantasy VII spin-offs, a plethora of merchandise associated with their IPs, and who can forget their attempt at an animated movie with Final Fantasy The Spirits Within.
Attempts that can look pathetic now, because they are a little, but there has been a very popular name that set the precedent of what a multimedia company could become. And that was Disney.
Ever since that weird guy had the idea of making a theme park out of their characters, the company has since been a juggernaut, touching and becoming part of almost any type of media you could imagine, be it animation, live action, TV, or even music. And they were very interested in this new little cool thing that the kids are loving, called a video game. When we compare it to other Hollywood companies, Disney seemed to be the one that maybe not really understood or respected the media, but saw it as an important market. Some of you Disney enthusiasts may remember games like those hard as hell to the platformers of the Renaissance movies, the Donald Duck Crash Bandicoots like, that time Rare made the only Disney racing game, or the Genesis classic Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, a game which is inferior to Mickey's Wild Adventure simply because the latter is the one that I actually played.
You can say whatever you want about the quality of these titles, but the quantity definitely proves that Disney was very interested in this industry, especially in the end of the 90s where they seemed like they could not fail. Especially now that they own this cool new studio that the kids are loving called Pixar, they basically were the 90s for kids. And it is in this pinnacle of both companies that the existence of Kingdom Hearts starts to make a little more sense. Hello, I'm Alveline, and today I want to share to you a comprehensive retrospective of the development of all games of the Kingdom Hearts franchise. I've collected a bunch of interviews, industry insights, and various sources to provide to you a very well-founded timeline. However, it's important to note that not everything was leaked or expressed through words. See, I don't want to simply give you a sequence of fun facts. I actually want to dissect these facts related to other contexts, like the dynamics of the gaming and tech industry, the contrasting ways in which Americans and Japanese consume medias, and how these factors influence the way that these creators made the series. For a lot of the more important statements, I will put the number of the link where I got my information here. You can enter and see for yourself. But when I'm interpreting something, I will put an M. M for me and for my name, Mikan. So, let's get it. It all started with the mind of one man who had an incredible idea that seemed impossible but took it to the extreme because he believed in his vision. And that man was Shinji Hashimoto. Producer of many Square in-house games for decades, Hashimoto coincidentally met an executive of Disney in Japan, claiming that both companies shared the same building. And that allowed the idea of a crossover between the two companies to capture the interest of their respective CEOs. I'm sure most of you know this, it's one of the most well-known fun facts in the history of gaming, which becomes more interesting the further you look for it, because the less sense it makes. This event did happen, many people at Square told the same story, but the idea of a crossover between the two franchises seemingly came way earlier. To this day, I'm not sure if the idea of a Disney game came before by Square or was only decided after the meeting. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to follow pretty literally this interview between the late CEO of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, with one very quiet and very powerful man called Tetsuya Nomura. The man responsible for everything that Kingdom Hearts is and stands for better or worse. Some would also point out that he is responsible for Final Fantasy VII, and all of Final Fantasy, and all of Square, and the entirety of JRPG as a genre, and everything that's wrong with the Japanese. Nomura has as many fans as he has haters. But how did he manage to lead with almost no restriction a crossover between two gigantic corporations? Where did he even come from? Nomura does not have any dramatics come up. His father accurately predicted that computers would be extremely important in business going forward, so he bought him a computer, to which Nomura, as your usual fan of Dragon Quest, used to learn programming. However, he has always been mostly an artist, not only inspired by manga and anime, but also fashion and even graphic design. Because when he joined Squaresoft around 1991, his early credits included monster designs and UI designs for games like Final Fantasy IV and V.
His roles kept expanding with time though, including UI design, character design, and eventually he was proposing the backstories of the characters that he designed, examples being Shadow and Setzer from Final Fantasy VI. For the next 5 years or so, the people of Square would have an increased level of respect and appreciation towards him. He even started to illustrate other artists' characters like the ones from Brave Fencer Musashi, a game that certainly will not be relevant for any other segment of this video. His name would be definitely marked upon the company in 1997 when he was one of the many creative leads on Final Fantasy VII, one of the biggest commercial and critical successes that Square got through its history, being credited as character designer, battle visual director, and most important to the discussion around him, writing the game to an extent we are not fully sure to this day. Tetsuya Nomura had become an important asset to the image that Square has been growing on the 90s, and you know something that he was really into at that time?
It's me, Mario! Hello!
A year after FF7, Nintendo released Super Mario 64. The first attempt of the studio of bringing the iconic character to the 3D space was a massive hit, and in many ways also ahead of its time, with these pretty open, nuanced worlds in which you could explore with a freedom that was not very common on the industry then. And Nomura loved the game. He had in mind and checked with colleagues how much he wanted to do a similar game. However, a lot of them already discouraged the idea because who could have possibly compete with Mario, one of the most recognizable characters of all time? One day, randomly working for another project, Nomura overheard two other Square figures talking in the same room, those being Shinji Hashimoto and the father of Final Fantasy himself, Hironobu Sakaguchi, saying something in the lines of, "Mickey Mouse would be great, but I'm not sure if we can use him." Nomura connected the dots, noticed that this was the moment he was looking for, and pitched his idea, which took the interest out of them, but it wasn't a confirmation that they could successfully pitch this idea to Disney and the other higher-ups. You know what happens next. Flash forward a few days and Nomura himself is directly talking to the executives at Disney. Once again, I mentioned it is a great idea, but they only had to gain with this. The partnership would increase the size of future Final Fantasy and Square enthusiasts, and Disney, aiming to resonate with a new youth, found themselves side to side with one of the most promising developers of this new media. Although in the conversations themselves, everybody had different ideas of what they wanted the game to be. Nomura cut them all off and proposed his pitch. A totally original character would travel to Disney worlds with cameos from Final Fantasy characters in an action RPG platformer. Also, that main character looked like this. Can you imagine how different Kingdom Hearts would culturally be if Sora was a furry with a chainsaw?
He was pushed back a few times, but after coming back with this new design, he received a better reception. And although many at Disney still had problems with the concept, the final okay came from Disney president himself, Bob Iger, who was seemingly super into the idea, and the production was greenlighted. The development of Kingdom Hearts began in February of 2000, with Tetsuya Nomura assuming the director's mantle for the first time. I think that even though this was a big crossover, the fact that it wasn't a main Final Fantasy itself gave Square a little bit more freedom and leeway for them to actually experiment and test their ways into this new technology of the PlayStation 2. Which is why they gave the directing mantle to Nomura, as this was his chance to prove himself as a director. And those were 2 pretty intensive years of development.
Development was more efficient and experimental compared to today's standards due to the limitations of the PlayStation 2. It was easier to make assets in it without taking too much time or money. So while there are many interesting fun facts from this era, I will focus on what I find the most significant. First off, although this wasn't the first action RPG Square ever made, Brave Fencer Musashi beat them in that, they just threw that team aside and picked different developers from, at the time, recent Final Fantasy games. Disney surprisingly gave them a lot of freedom for which IPs they could work with. However, you could notice that there were some restrictions. First, they did not allow Disney characters from different movies to interact, only Donald and Goofy were allowed to. Second, the team could only use Mickey Mouse in one single scene. And third, the team wanted to make a Toy Story world as early as the first game. You can see the design of that world in the Zoe document they presented to Disney. They did not include it though because at the time, Disney had only a part of Pixar, mostly its merchandising and distribution. Pixar was owned by many different people and companies at the time. But perhaps the most important single decision of development happened the earliest. When Nomura got the okay from Disney and was planning to make a simpler game with a bigger focus on the gameplay, he was approached by Sakaguchi, in which he gave only one advice.
Interpreting this advice in my own dramatic way, it would be something like, Square created the following due to our ambitious storytelling. So if you really want to capture new and old fans with your RPG title, you gotta make that story more involving. A piece of advice Tetsuya Nomura took to heart.
And in March of 2002 in Japan and in the end of the year for the rest of the world, Kingdom Hearts was released. It tells the story of best friends Sora, Riku and Kairi when their home world was invaded by the Heartless. While Sora gained the powerful Keyblade, Riku surrenders himself to the darkness and Kairi disappears in Sora's arm, eventually leading to the destruction of their world. Waking up in another world, Sora meets Donald and Goofy, who themselves are looking for their missing king Mickey Mouse. Together, the three goes to different worlds based on Disney IPs, protecting them from the Heartless while looking for their missing friends.
I don't want to give a lot of opinions here, I want to mostly focus on the history of the games itself, so my only piece of opinion I'll give towards Kingdom Hearts 1 is that it is the best game ever made and everyone that complains about the clunkiness of this game is weak.
When it comes to its critics' reception, Kingdom Hearts, like many games from its time, have reached that level where its ambitions shows a lot of cracks in which this game did not hold very well. Most of that comes from its movement and level design. Although it also achieved that level inside the fandom discussion where it's being rehabilitated and receiving way more praises nowadays, with a lot of people like me that agree that this is the best one. And its ambition paid off, becoming one of video games' most unpredictable classics.
I also want to talk about sales really quickly. All of the numbered Kingdom Hearts games sold more than 6 million copies, and basically every spin-off sold around 1 million, without even including the remasters. I want to put emphasis on this because I think this puts Kingdom Hearts in a very favorable position. The game sells well enough where there is an incentive to do more and to go even bigger, but it doesn't sell as much to the point where the executives and dumb people will start sort of vulturing around the franchise. I think it's such a weird success compared to the other popular things at Disney that Disney doesn't really mess with the series all that much. They know that Square can handle the series itself, so they most likely just like receiving the free money once in a while. Especially because they need it. In the turn of the millennium, Disney immediately hit the ground with layoffs and with their newest movies bombing pretty hard, dealing a dry death to the Renaissance era. So much so that I would tell you that if Kingdom Hearts was pitched 1 year after, even if the elevator pitch still happened, I think it may have not gone forward.
Obviously, with such a success under their belt, a sequel was greenlighted, and the team was excited to work on it, but they couldn't. They wanted to use Mickey Mouse more in the next game, but Disney was still pretty unsure in giving their mascot to another company. Which may sound surprising seeing how they gave rights to their movies to Square, but kids nowadays do not remember how important Mickey Mouse was to Disney back then. He was Disney. You mess with him and you mess with Walt Disney as an entity. In the meantime, the main studio released Kingdom Hearts Final Mix. This was a re-release of the original game with more content and some things rebalanced. This approach wasn't really popular on the West, so this version never released outside of Japan, only when they remastered and ported this game to other consoles years later.
Squaresoft also released an Ultimania for the series. This is a series of books which is your typical commercial concept art book, but it also contains not only images but also interviews with the staff of the games. These Ultimanias would be basically the main form where we would get the insight over the development process of the series, and it's where most of my sources come from. But sadly, the original Final Mix would be the last time Squaresoft would work with Kingdom Hearts, because in 2003, the merge happened. Ever since 2000, Square was pretty interested in acquiring rival multimedia company, Enix, the ones responsible for Dragon Quest and the Gundam magazine. The reason it did not happen earlier was because of that animated Final Fantasy movie, Spirits Within, where it was such a tremendous flop that Enix reacted with a what the hell that lasted 3 years. After the success of Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts, they agreed in merging. Starting with April of 2003, Squaresoft was now known as Square Enix. And contrary to popular belief, this didn't seem to affect the working studios all that much. Although some sources do mention that around 20% of the staff in those companies were laid off during this process. There's this very interesting site here which divided each development department of the studio, who leads them, what are their goals, with Square and Enix teams still being pretty well divided. There's this cute one right here, Development Division 5, where sports and remakes are made, managed by Yusuke Hirata, with its studios divided in Tokyo and Osaka. What game did this guy produce? Of course, it's Brave Fencer Musashi.
Things weren't changing just for Square Enix themselves though. Did you hear that they finally released the new Pokemon Gem on the Game Boy Advance? In an interview with Nomura, he, or at the very least the translation, implied that he was being asked by someone to make a Kingdom Hearts game to the Game Boy Advance, seeing how Cade's target audience would be almost the same as the ones who like Nintendo, specifically Pokemon. In which Nomura wasn't really interested because he didn't think that a portable Cage game would work, as he would not able to handle the game's action combat. Which is a very funny statement nowadays. However, when he heard the wishes of the children wanting to play Kingdom Hearts on the go, he decided to prep something up. Square contracted the portable-focused Japanese studio Jupiter Corporation, who made games for other companies like Disney and Nintendo. So, at Tokyo Game Show 2003, Square announced Kingdom Hearts
Restoration at 12%.
and Chain of Memories, which would eventually release at the tail end of 2004. So, did I mention that this game is a direct canonical sequel to Kingdom Hearts 1? Here, on the Game Boy Advance? Chain of Memories is not only a recap of KH1 in the GBA, it also tells a new story that builds the original universe of the franchise. Come, as we call it, sold and was received fine enough. This is one of the few that I haven't played because I, like many, played the remake, in which I will cover soon enough, but the people that played this game seems to like it a bit. I do definitely enjoy the story though. Although it continues the story and it is a necessary part for you to understand major fragments of the narrative in an unpreferable console, Com also had its own arc for the characters that makes it feel more than just a bridge in between games.
Going back to our main studio, they finally were allowed to use Mickey Mouse in a bigger capacity, and the development of the game started at full force on July of 2003. And to my personal surprise, a lot of the theme is the same. I know that this may sound obvious to some, but I find the overall design philosophy around many parts of the second game to be quite different compared to the first. Namely, its level design. From being intentionally obtuse and vertical, we got something more linear that relies more heavily on the aesthetics. I straight up believe Nomura just killed the level designer.
But no. Credited as map planning director, Takeshi Endo worked for both Kingdom Hearts numbered games and was supervisor on level design in the series up until Birth by Sleep. Same goes for Yuichi Kanemori and Mitsunori Takahashi. Both are credited as the battle planners of the first game and were promoted to lead planners of the second. Which could explain the bigger focus on combat in KH2, Nomura and Square wanted to make a more combat-oriented game, leading to those two becoming bigger parts of the studio. But the rest, same art directors, sound programmers, and writers.
Restoration at 28%.
I mentioned before how, due to Sakaguchi's advice, Nomura started writing a more involving story in these games, and although he is the strongest leading force on that department, there were other guys who consistently wrote the games up to this point. There are a lot of people that are credited as scenario in these games. From what I understand, those people are more focused in tying the story of the game to the story of the movies. They focus more on the Disney part of it all. However, the two guys who were credited as writers were Masaru Oka,
Restoration at 48%.
Yume. Oka is also one that takes a more supporting role because he is also credited as the cutscene director of literally every Kingdom Hearts game to come. I presume his job is more focused on taking what the authors write and structures them in a cinematic way, while Nojima does seem to take a bigger part, as he was another one who rose up in Square with his writing at the same time Nomura did, with this being one of his last titles before he left the company.
Restoration at 79%.
In December of 2005 in Japan and throughout 2006 for the rest of the world, Kingdom Hearts
Restoration
2 was released. The game tells the story of after the events of Kingdom Hearts
97%.
The game tells the story of Roxas and the mundane summer vacation he's living through in Twilight Town, until the city starts being invaded by white monsters, black hooded men, and the reality seeming to continually break around him. The beginning of this game is awesome, because it's aware of the fact that many of the players had not played the Game Boy game and were just excited to travel to Disney Worlds with Sora again, and uses this to tell a mysterious existentialist story with a completely new character, before giving you what you actually want. And at this point, you can see how much KH was really starting to create its own new identity, in spite of the wishes of many future criticizers. Kingdom Hearts 2, also the best game ever made. I didn't lie about the first one, that is the best game ever made as well, but this one is 2. Which one I like most depends on my mood of the day. A little interpretation of mine here, but the main 2000ness of this game is not only apparent through its aesthetics, but also some of its mechanics. For instance, the Mulan world introduced a morale feature that took me far too long to realize was a reference to Dynasty Warriors, a popular series in Japan during that era. There's a slew of minigames that let you ride a skateboard reminiscent of the Tony Hawk series, which was a massive hit back then. The Little Mermaid world added a couple of rhythm minigames, which coincided with the rising popularity of Guitar Hero, although rhythm games had always enjoyed a strong following in Japan. And let's not forget Resident Evil 4, which popularized the QuickTime event, in which KH2 deliciously embraced in its reaction commands. This game also marked the first time they collaborated with live-action movies, including ones from Pirates of the Caribbean and Tron. Kingdom Hearts 2 sold just as well as the first, but at the time the critic reception was good but a little unsatisfied. There were many people that felt like the difficulty of the game was too easy, and some aspects of the design overly simplified. As time went on though, Kingdom Hearts 2 became unarguably the people's favorite. But a lot of that passion came in the fact that first, this is going to be the last home console KH game for the decade to come, so it did feel like the more polished and accessible one out of the series for a long time. And second, although the focus on the combat did lead to some elements being lost, it absolutely paid off well, as not only hack and slashes were the thing back in the mid 2000s, but I would argue KH2 rivals head to head with many of the best games of the genre to this day.
What else can be said? This game changed my life. We say a lot of this over a lot of cool medias and new things that we love and experience, but generally Kingdom Hearts has been such an instrumental part of my childhood and my teenager years and my adult years and literally all of my existence, that I genuinely feel like if I haven't played Kingdom Hearts 2 when I was a child, I think I would be a whole other person. And of course, I'm not the only one. So after this monumental hit, the third game was highly awaited and it came out 13 years after it. I could come here and just continue talking about the games in chronological order, but I think it's very important for you to understand why Kingdom Hearts 3 didn't come out. It wasn't just because Nomura didn't felt like it, but actually there was a big gigantic shift on the gaming industry and the corporate culture of Square Enix. So let's answer it. Why did KH3 took so long to come out? I want to get out of the way first this idea that got popularized after this Nomura claim on an issue of Edge magazine came out, that he didn't want to make Kingdom Hearts 3 if he could not use Pixar characters. Which I think it's bullshit. It's clear how he and the rest of the team really liked Toy Story and were trying to implement them for years, but would you really ruin your series and your creative output simply because of another company? Like, I can see myself doing that. What I presume is the idea is that Nomura wanted to use Pixar characters only starting at KH3, because Pixar was fully bought by the devil in 2006, so technically they could implement some of the Pixar characters in the portable games, in the spin-offs, but they wanted to wait towards Kingdom Hearts 3, so that, you know, there's this whole cool marketing push behind it, you know, the same way that the live action characters only started appearing in KH2, you know. The true answer comes in three parts. First comes Nomura creative mindset.
As I mentioned, Kingdom Hearts 2 was the end of that arc. Nomura was much more interested in other projects he was working on, namely two games we're going to talk about soon, so KH3 basically didn't exist in any physical form. Second comes the large video game industry, who was welcoming its new 7th generation, with the Xbox 360 kicking the doors open early, later followed by the PlayStation 3 and the Nintendo Wii. Square Enix was most interested in this new power because at the time, they were starting to lose their edge in gaming culture. As much as nowadays people love and revere the PS2 era, Square was definitely losing their hype after their heights in the 90s. Seeking to make an impact, Square Enix announced 4 different Final Fantasy projects in the late 2000s. The first one is only a tech demo, one made simply to show the power of the PlayStation 3, being a little remake of the intro of Final Fantasy VII, one clip that broke the mind of FF fans worldwide that a full-blown remake was starting to be a common wish among fans. The core Final Fantasy studio was making Final Fantasy XIII, because we're talking about old school Square Enix. 2 years later they announced Final Fantasy XIV, which was their second attempt to make a mainline MMORPG, and of course,
Noctis OG. Noctis OG. あれ、迫力ですね。
a spin-off of 13 that would use the mythos of the original while telling an independent story. This, my friends, this was what Tetsuya Nomura and the entire Kingdom Hearts team were working on. Final Fantasy Vs 13, a fully Nomura-led FF game. And man, how exciting can that be? After working for years on the same company, always under the eyes of the seniors of Square and Disney, now you had a project just for you and your team. One that seeks to do much of the same of what they did in Kingdom Hearts, but now in a bigger open world scope.
You know what these 4 titles all have in common? They're all being made in the new Crystal Tunes game engine. The third and biggest factor as to why Kingdom Hearts 3 took so long to come out. For a lot of the people who are not very into the development of video games, presumably speaking, a game engine is the software in which they make the games, where they put the assets, the animations, the codes together, but every engine works in wildly different ways. The way that they interpret and work with 3D graphics, 2D graphics, physics, collision detection, animation, sound, artificial intelligence, it all changes a lot. Studios are quite conservative with their approach to engines because changing to a new one is very hard. But at times, depending on your ambitions, usually the older engines can handle as much, so changing to a new engine can be beneficial.
The idea of a dedicated Square Enix mega engine came with the very good intentions of Taku Murata, claiming that he had the idea to create a better engine because of his day working as a programmer in Final Fantasy Tactics, as the newcomers and exchanges from the studio were having trouble dealing with that game engine, seeing how every studio at Squaresoft at the time had wildly different configurations for their particular softwares. The idea was greenlighted in 2004, and Murata, alongside developers who volunteered to help him momentarily, worked with the project. And in 2005, 1 year or so later, they showed that Final Fantasy VII tech demo, which impressed both fans and developers alike so much that they wanted to work with that engine. So, Final Fantasy XIII, which was originally supposed to release in the PlayStation 2, was changed to the new generation instead, and other studios followed suit.
So, recap with me here. Murata managed to make, with a group of volunteer developers, a 3-minute long cinematic. And now that year-old engine is being made to create a turn-based RPG, an open-world action RPG, and an MMORPG. Do you guys get it yet? What followed were years of chaos, because Murata's team tried to adapt the engine to the needs of several different game projects and prevented specific parts of the engine to be finalized or just improved. But the teams couldn't wait, so they started to make assets, models, animations, and when they tried to port them to Crystal Tools, the software didn't accept them, throwing days of work at the garbage.
At the end, it was decided that the whole company would focus their effort in releasing Final Fantasy XIII, which came out in 2010 and had mixed receptions, but at least sold well. Final Fantasy XIV, on the other hand, was a catastrophe. from what I understand, the game wasn't done in oh so many different ways. And how could it be done when half of the time the tools that made the game didn't work?
This one-two punch of mediocrity basically broke Square Enix's reception with the public. And to this day it hasn't earned back. It was not just fans that were bleeding out, but also money. A lot of money. That cost them a lot. Be it for Crystal 2's essentially slowing everything up, or Final Fantasy XIV not making the monthly money that they expected, and even the low performance of the Western studios that they bought. And from all of that, the title that suffered the most was Final Fantasy Versus 13. According to another frequent director of Square Enix in 2013, 7 years after the development of the game started, Versus 13 was 20% done. I know that I'm like smiling a lot, but goddamn, companies are so fucking dumb. I do want to continue this whole period of the 7th generation, but first, let's go back to Kingdom Hearts.
It was 2006, I was right with the word and everybody was happy with KH2. And to follow tradition, they also started to develop a final mix version of the game, releasing only on Japan again in March of 2007, with a second disc. What was in that second disc, you ask? There was a remake of Chain of Memories that only released as a standalone title in North America at the end of 2008. Recom, as the community calls it, consensually was known for being the worst out of the franchise. Personally, I believe that comes in the fact that the game very poorly mixes its card systems with the 3D action environment, creating a sense of duality and inconsistency throughout the game that made it very unfun to play. But the community has softened a lot towards it. It has that specific niche RPG systems that people just love to get into the mathematics and min-maxing of it all. And once again, it's just pretty fun seeing this good story told in a more cinematic light.
But wait, if the main KH studio were finishing up Final Mix and then later went to make Versus 13 and the whole rest of the studio were too occupied with the new gen tech, who made this game? Development Department 5? No, they just made those ports for portables. They made a game? They made 2 games? Which ones? Oh! Okay, let's talk about the Osaka team. As, spoiler alert, they basically would make all of the main Kingdom Hearts studios from this point forward. The Osaka team obviously changed a lot through time, not even Yusuke Hirata stayed for very long, so just mentioning some of the names that caught my attention, we have people like Yume Miyazaki, first credited in Samurai Legend Musashi, would become the map director of the next KH games, Tomokazu Shibata, the new battle director coming from
The Bouncer.
And most notoriously, Tai Yasui, the first person of this entire franchise to be credited as co-director. And this is one interesting aspect of these games that I want to make you think about. I'm going to make the common assumption where a game director is the one that mostly leads the team creatively, while a game producer is the one more managing focused. And for the previous Kingdom Hearts games, we did have plenty directors, but they were all focused on specific parts of the game, like, the combat, the level design, and so forth. Tai Yasui was the first and more frequent collaborator to be credited as co-director, which I think kind of proves that for the next few years, Kingdom Hearts would also be his baby. He would guide the studio and structure the ideas of Nomura into a game, while the other was too occupied on the 17 different projects that Square Enix was putting him on. According to Nomura, the Osaka team wanted to make a Kingdom Hearts game for a good while, asking that if the opportunity rose to make a spin-off, they would love to work for it, and it soon did. Which makes me sad that their first offering was so bad, But also being fair, they were basically remaking a very different type of game that was in another company made by other people, but it was still a pretty sucky first impression, and I think one that stuck for a long while.
Okay, the remake of Con is done, so we all know that this is the time where Kingdom Hearts slowed down and wouldn't have many news about.
They announced 3 Kingdom Hearts games at Tokyo Game Show 2007.
The first one announced was Kingdom Hearts Coded, which you could say was another recap / remake attempt at a KH1, this time targeting the cool new cell phones. The second, and the one that got the most spotlight in the event, being Kingdom Hearts 358 Days Over 2. Why do they pronounce it that way? I don't know. This game focused on Roxas and his life prior to the events of KH2 in the Organization 13. It was releasing on the Nintendo DS. And third, but not least, a prequel set before the events of Kingdom Hearts 1, Birth by Sleep, that would be released on the PSP.
Okay, you may understand now why the team changed, but still, why did they refuse to put these games in any home console? Let's take a look once again at the 7th generation. If you're a little into the history of video games, you may know that the release of the PlayStation 3 was extremely disappointing, be it with its inaccessible price, its uninteresting and small catalogs of games, and especially the PS3 was intentionally hard to make games to. I'm not very knowledgeable over the programming details, but something about the memory constraint, how it handles and processes information, was noticeably harder compared to other platforms of the market. You had to fully reprogram aspects of the game, hoping that the game can run without many problems. That, alongside the other necessities of HD gaming, contributed to a very hard transition stage for the larger Japanese gaming market. But what about the 360 and the Wii? I don't think I really need to tell you that Xbox always had a hard time in consistently investing, collaborating, and succeeding in Japan. And the Nintendo Wii was the first time that Nintendo was actively doing its own thing, creating its own universe with their home consoles, which implied that the type of game that you made for the Wii was very specifically for the Wii. But that wasn't the only Nintendo console out there, because a few years back they released the Nintendo DS, which became ultra popular, like behind only the PlayStation 2 in sales. Its success can be attributed to many things, like the accessible price, the intuitive touchscreen, the social multiplayer aspect of the platform, and specifically focused on the Japanese market. It was the new console that the Japanese were buying the most. It was one of the easiest to make a game to, since the games didn't need to be at HD quality.
Even Square Enix and Nomura understood that, because the second game the director was cooking up at the time was The World Ends With You, in which he took the position of a close producer alongside planning director Hiroyuki Ito and Jupiter Corporation, the developers behind the original Chain of Memories.
What happened in this jam was basically a large-scale migration from Japanese audiences, gamers, and developers from home consoles to portable ones. It was simply the safest option on an industry that had changed so much. Kingdom Hearts is not made only for the Japanese, but definitely puts them as their #1 priority. So yes, despite your knowledge, there were 3 new different Kingdom Hearts games released to portable consoles, and I'm gonna cover all of them in order of release.
Kingdom Hearts Coded, as I mentioned, was similar in spirit to Chain of Memories. It is an original story that recaps the events of Kingdom Hearts 1 in another platform, and was purposely made to not tie in with the events of the other games as much. The team was formed by a lot of miscellaneous people who had worked in other mobile and portable games, but easily the most notable name of the bunch was the co-director of the game, Hajime Tabata, who just worked close with Nomura in directing Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. What a nice young man, he seems to be going places.
Wikipedia says that Nomura gave the idea of making each world be filled with different minigames, and Tabata hated that. There was no source for this statement, but if it is true, it would make the relationship already way funnier.
Coded is different than the others because first, although still an action RPG at heart, the game heavily embraces mini-games into its combat, with each world having dedicated gimmicks throughout the level. And second, it was released episodically, from November of 2008 to January of 2010, which means it released alongside the other two games to come. Although there was a plan to release the mobile game to the West, it didn't come to be, because the cell phones we had at the time weren't strong enough to handle the game, so it maintained for the next short years a Japanese exclusive until the remake. After that, we got Kingdom Hearts 358 Days Over 2, released in May in Japan, end of 2009 for the rest of the world, which tells the experiences of Roxas prior to the events of KH2, being his days completing missions with the organization, his connections with the other members, and with the 14th secret member who nobody spoke about until now, Shion. The team chosen for this one was a frequent Square Enix and Bandai Namco collaborator, Hokkaido Artist Network and Development, or just known by hand. The proximity with the company and their experiences with the DS must have made them the most appropriate group to work with, seeing as the people who made Chain of Memories and World Ends With You were too occupied with Disney Fairies Tinkerbell and the Great Fairy Rescue. This is a more direct translation of the Numbered Cade's gameplay, but this time the worlds are divided by missions so that you could play the game in chunks on the go with the Nintendo DS. Even the choice with Roxas as the protagonist served as not only deepening his character, but also because Nomura thought it would be cool to make a multiplayer mode in which you could play with the members of Organization 13.
358 Days encoded Oded in interesting ways. I'm sure you know, these two are the only games that were not remade. These were the ones that on the Remasters collection were actually transformed into sort of movies, cutscene collection stuff. I wonder how much this affected the long-term reputation of these games. Coded never really got a second chance, I feel, but Days has always been the first one of many Kingdom Hearts fans, so these games reside in a very weird but memorable place in people's hearts.
But from the Tokyo Game Show, the one which caught the most attention out of the audience was the last game announced, as it was the one that looked the closest to the numbered games, and was what that secret scene from KH2 was teasing. This was going to be the first Kingdom Hearts game that the Osaka team would make at its entirety. Even the command deck, the main combat feature of the game, is in a way their version of the card decks of Calm. And both them and Nomura were pretty excited because BBS was being marketed as the episode 0 of the franchise, the true prequel game, the Phantom Menace of KH. And in January in Japan and September of 2010 for the rest of the world, Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep was released. To, at the time, critical and commercial success. It was the most liked KH game since KH2, and it is by sheer numbers the best-selling spin-off game. That success would basically confirm Osaka Studios' stay as the new main Kingdom Hearts team, as their proficiency with the assets, and with Nomura led them to make the final mix version and the next game shortly after this release, which nowadays is a controversial topic. Birth by Sleep is one of the most controversial games of the franchise, in the sense where I don't feel like there is a common opinion among the fanbase till to this day. I mean it when I say every single aspect of this game is controversial. The characters, the gameplay, the story. Ask a Kingdom Hearts fan and their feelings over them will be widely different, I guarantee.
If I may interject a little, I think that animosity comes from the fact that Birth by Sleep has a weak start, or at the very least a very fast one. The previous KG games always took a long time to start, they basically focus a lot on the status quo of the main characters. You sort of see how the main character's relationship with their friends and the world is, and Birth by Sleep doesn't do that. The reason why I don't think Birth by Sleep does that is because Nomura saw the criticism towards those intros at the time. Although people nowadays love Destiny Islands and especially love Roxas beginning in Twilight Town, at the time people hated those beginnings. And contrary to what a lot of people believe, Nomura actually does see the criticism and sort of trying to resolve them. But at times it kinda gets worse, and I think Birth by Sleep proves this point.
Development of the final mix version happened quick. So quick in fact that there are archives in this version with scenes from the next game. You can watch these scenes in this reference right here. But a short pit stop was made as the Osaka team were asked to help hand in the development of the remake of Kingdom Hearts Coded. Impossibly Nomura's thickest move so far, after Hand made a pretty one-on-one remake of the original game, there was a lot of space yet in the cartridge, so he asked them to make the game 3D and more similar to what they made in Days. Which Hand, rightly so, responded with a what the fuck, to which Nomura did not reply. This chaos was the reason why the Osaka team was called in to help. In October of 2010 in Japan, January of 2011 for the rest of the world, Kingdom Hearts Recoded was released to mild reviews. I am not as sure nowadays, but Recoded surely was the most infamous Cage game for most of its lifespan. The game has problems, most of them regarding the pace, the structure, and the overall abundance of minigames diverging away from the main combat, but I wanted to let it clear that a lot of that infamy came with the fact that Recoded to this day is the most separated and quote-unquote meaningless out of all the Kingdom Hearts games. It really only connects with the others in its ending, which says what was in the letter Mickey sent to Sora and what his next goal will be. You mostly are going to know that by the next game, which once again came fast.
The first idea that came through Nomura's and the Osaka team's head was to make a faster game, one where movement, be it vertical or horizontal, felt faster, freer. So one of their first focuses during the development of this new Cage game was movement. You can see that this is sort of when Nomura started becoming really obsessed with teleporting swords. And this focus of movement makes sense because I must remind you that Kingdom Hearts 1 was pretty inspired by the movement of Super Mario 64. Speaking of which, Cage 1 was going to be very soon 10 years old. 2012 was right at the door. What's also in 2012 was the Nintendo 3DS, a pretty direct sequel to the DS, which once again caught the attention of Nomura and the team, and they were pretty quick to release this new game on this new platform, and using the systems and assets and the whole cool new 3D things of the 3DS.
One of those being the dive mode, a minigame where, accompanied by the 3D system of the portable, creates that feeling that you are literally falling into a new world. The game would also attempt to incorporate elements from the monster capture genre, the likes of Pokemon, Persona, Powered.
I will allow this interview between Nomura and the late Satoru Iwata to speak for itself. That's right, Nintendogs made an impact on me as well. The way that game puts you in the contact with your pets. I always had battles in mind though. I wondered, why can't I make my Nintendogs fight? When you take your Nintendogs for a walk, and they meet other dogs via Street Pass, imagine if they could have a battle. And Dream Eaters were born, and one very interesting revelation that Ayasui made was how, when Nomura pitched his idea to him, he was pretty clearly interested in making a Riku story, and almost implying a whole Riku-focused game. And in the Ultimania interview, the big man said that after some criticism, he decided to put Sora in the game, because he noticed how people missed playing with him, which gave birth to the drop system, where you can play freely with each character, but after some time, the game will forcibly take you out of that character and make you play with another. So you can never be with Sora and Riku together in this game. You could say that they are distant from each other.
The 10-year anniversary of Cage 1, March in Japan and July for the rest of the world in 2012, Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance was released. Being one of the first fire releases of the 3DS and even featuring characters from The World Ends With You, this game, like the others, had a nice reception and sales at first. This was also when the wishes of Sora being included in Super Smash Bros., Nintendo's epic crossover party fighter, started to become intense, especially as the last entry of the time, Brawl, added Snake and Sonic, which seemed like impossible additions before they actually came to life. But that fame was contrary to the reception that Dream Drop Distance had in the long run. I'm going to make a big theory here, based on my experiences interacting with the community and the gaming space at large from the beginning of 2010 and after it, that Dream Drop Distance single-handedly destroyed Kingdom Hearts' reputation for the decade to come. Single-handedly. I'm sure most of you have heard how the story of Kingdom Hearts is too convoluted, or the games were released to many different consoles, and although that is not entirely untrue, I think pre-DDD is an exaggeration. You can play Kingdom Hearts 1, Rechain of Memories, and Kingdom Hearts 2 on your PlayStation 2, and you basically have a whole tight trilogy right there. With a Nintendo DS, you can play a game which is only a remake of Kingdom Hearts 1, and you know, the whole story happens in a computer, so it actively is in a whole other part of the universe of Cage. And Days is like a prequel focused on the antagonists, you know, it isn't super important. Like, the craziest thing about that game is why did nobody mention Xion before that game? But even the concept of memory was worked on before, so it's nothing new at the end of the day. And Birth by Sleep, the PSP game, is as prequel-y as prequels can get. Why did nobody mention these guys before? Because they died a decade ago. That's normal between humans. Nothing confusing happens in this game, except as to why Ventus and Roxas have the same appearance. They do because Ventus became a part of Sora's heart, and when Roxas was born through Sora's heart, he inherited the appearance of Ventus. If this is confusing to you, have you ever heard about sets? So yes, it's like 2 prequels, 3 video games. It's not the best thing in the world, especially if you're like me on a lower income country, but it's not the worst thing in the world. DDD screw things all over it because it sort of wants to be a commemoration for the 10 years of Kingdom Hearts. So it sort of is a mini KH3. It wants to be a fanservice fest. It wants to make all the characters appear, all they interact, and I think the story of the game makes a whole lot more sense when you start looking as if it were a Riku only game. I think it would work better that way because the overall experience of Dream Drop feels very flawed. Sora isn't very well written in this game, the Dream Eaters are so distant of what Heartless and Nobodies were, the game design show even more flaws of Osaka's design philosophy. It was just a very bad way to commemorate the 10 years of the franchise. Dream Drop Distance was sort of the logical conclusion of all the decisions that Square took when managing the series, you know? And it kinda sucked. Even after all of that, I would say Dream Drop Distance is overhated. It's a game that still works for me, but with each passing year, a disgust towards it seems to only increase in the fandom. And even if the attitude towards the franchise is changing up after this many years, especially with the remaster collection, I don't think it's unfair to speculate that the sequence of releases broke a lot of the momentum that the series gained back in the 2000s. Even if these portable games are fine, the fact that they came up in the way that they did and finished in the way that it did made the whole experience retroactively worse. It does not help that for the next half of the 2010s, this was going to be the last Kingdom Hearts game. '13. This was an exciting year for gaming because at the end of that year, the 8th generation of consoles would officially begin, with the PlayStation 4 being just PlayStation 3 and more, and the all-in-one box Xbox One ironically having its gaming section being the least important part of its whole rollout. Square was excited with this new generation, but instead of being a more technological, perhaps even artistical interest, it was more of a we gotta make this money back interest. 2013 marked the end of the Crystal Tools era. After almost bleeding the company to death, the last game credited with using the engine was Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII. So this was the moment that Square Enix decided to revigorate their AAA output. Cut to E3 2013. At the PlayStation conference, a special video of Nomura appears sharing the newest trailer of Versus 13. And what a fucking trailer. This thing still looks insane a decade later. It is so raw and big and massive and insane and cool, and in the end of the trailer,
いや、世界は常に変化する。15番目だ。
Final Fantasy Versus 13 had just become a full-fledged main FF game, coming to the PlayStation 4. If the scopes and possibilities were already large before, imagine it now. But he wasn't over yet. This was mostly a reconfirmation of the first batch of remasters for the Kingdom Hearts series, starting with KH1, Recom, and a movie version of 358 Days Over 2 from the PlayStation 3, but... wait, what's that? No. No, it can't be. No way. Holy shit. Kingdom Hearts 3 was real. It even had a real gameplay section at the end. Now this is big. This is massive. This is so fucking cool. But there's one more announcement I want to talk about. This one made 2 years later on PlayStation's E3 conference of 2015. Yeah, that's right, baby, we're the Final Fantasy! They also announced the remake of Final Fantasy VII after people begging for years since that tech demo, which was also being directed by Tetsuya Nomura. So, Nomura is making Final Fantasy XV, Kingdom Hearts 3, and 7 Remake. How is that possible? Well, it ain't. Remember that time where Square announced 3 games made in the same engine and they almost burned to death because of that? Well, it didn't happen again, but it came close. So long story short for the development of these 3 games. Final Fantasy Versus 13 was being made in the Luminous engine, one that was created with the scraps of Crystal Tools, but this time around with developers from all around the globe. And this team, alongside Final Fantasy Type 0 director and team, took over the project entirely, kicking out the whole Kingdom Hearts main studio that was working on the project, or what was left from the studio, because most of the seniors at that point had already left or fired themselves because of that whole extreme chaotic moment that must have sucked to work with. It is generally very sad how a lot of the people that made Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 so good kinda aren't making games anymore. Okay, but what the fuck is Final Fantasy Type 0? Well, it was an original spin-off made by Hajime Tabata. Yes, the coded guy and the Crisis Core one. He took over Nomura's years-long passion project. He was the guy that mentioned that when he took over, the project was only 20% complete. But why the hell did Nomura and the rest of the team were kicked out of the project? There's not an existing answer for that, as I could gather, but I think we can very easily presume it's because of 7 Remake, as Final Fantasy VII is like a sure money cow and was a remake that was being asked for since forever. The chances of 7 Remake being a bigger success than Versus 13 was way higher, which
It is ironic that Nomura only discovered that he was director of Final Fantasy VII Remake when the trailer credited him as such. He was aware that the remake was being done, but he thought that the director was going to be Yoshinari Kitase, the producer, and they were sort of talking of what they could do, while Kitase always thought that Nomura was going to be the director. This is also my indirect way of kind of protecting Nomura from this backlash. I think he's usually the one people point the fingers towards, the delays, the wait for these games to come, and sort of the results, the way that they usually come out, the final product. But it's Square. It almost always is the fault of the company. Even Shinji Hashimoto, that producer that I mentioned, he even thought that Nomura was still directing 15. He's wrong. He claimed a lie. Now, say what you will about the Osaka team, but they made one extremely intelligent decision early on. You see, as KH3 was structurally similar to 15, the idea was that both were going to be made on the Luminous engine. However, someone, somewhere, sent by Buddha himself, convinced them to change to Unreal Engine 4, a decision that was becoming increasingly popular in the Japanese gaming industry. I've heard that apparently Unreal was not only easier to make and more popular, but also because the documentation of the engine actually comes in Japanese. Which was a great decision because the Luminous engine ended up having problems as well, because once again, making an engine at the same time you're making a big blockbuster game, not a good idea. However, the exchange was that basically the whole project had to be restarted, so that the real gameplay footage wasn't real anymore. And that decision was only made at around 1 year or some months after the Z3. So technically when the trailer was first shown to us, what ended up becoming Kingdom Hearts 3 was like less 20% complete. The following years would mark, in my experience, the worst period to be a Kingdom Hearts fan. Kingdom Hearts 3 was nowhere in sight, the last game was inaccessible and disappointing to many people, and the remasters were poorly received because they took so long to come out, and they weren't very good remasters because the PS3 is a hell machine. If you had one cool news about Kingdom Hearts, it was one too many, and it was just a very boring time whatsoever. There was a Kingdom Hearts game released in 2013? Seriously? Which one?
At Tokyo Game Show 2012, months before E3, they not only announced those Kingdom Hearts remasters, but also a game only known at the time as Kingdom Hearts for PC browsers. In July of 2013, Kingdom Hearts Unchained Key was released exclusively to Japan. Kingdom Hearts Key, some say Kai, but the meaning is the same, follows a similar design philosophy to the other spin-offs released until now. It's a prequel game focusing on a different set of characters in a different part of the universe of the series, made to be accessible for the people who never played the games before. This time around, on the very ancient past, the lead up to the Keyblade War, one of the most important events of the universe of KH. The game was made by Success Corporation, the studio responsible for the worst game I've ever played in my life, and was co-directed by Hiroyuki Ito, one of the directors of The World Ends With You. Yes, if you're wondering why that sequel took so long to come out, I think I know one of the reasons. The game was discontinued and suffered significant changes and was released worldwide to modern phones in 2016 with a new name, Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. I don't know if the game was already like this before becoming a mobile game, but Union Cross is essentially a gacha game. In the same vein of Fire Emblem Heroes and Fate Grand Order, this is a game where you waste obscene amounts of money to get new abilities, and these new abilities are tied to a PNG. And you complete different missions for the 5 different factions you can choose in this game. Much later, in 2020, a standalone game was released where you could access it through the UnionQuest app called Dark Road, another prequel using the same assets that focus on the main antagonist of the series up to that point, Zehanort, and ultimately the whole app and story reached its end in the middle of 2021, becoming mostly a cutscene collection from what I understand.
I blazed through the 10-year history of this game. Yes, these characters are 10 years old, because honestly, who cares? I mean, this is Kingdom Hearts, of course somebody cares, there's always gonna be somebody that cares for anything in this life, but like, when we compare to the other Kingdom Hearts games, we're continually revisiting, reminding, rethinking of these past games, seeing what worked and what didn't, while Union Cross always felt dead. Like sometimes a tweet would pop off because of some major story revelation, and then we all went back to forgetting the game existed again. I know that I am sounding way more aggressive toward this title than the other ones, but I think this mostly comes with my beef towards mobile games. You see, nowadays we don't really have a sequel to the PS Vita or the Nintendo 3DS. That niche of the low-budget, experimental, portable games sort of doesn't exist anymore. The ones that took their place were the mobile games. And those are barely games, and not because they don't have like mechanics or such, but they are pretty clearly made to be money vacuums. I don't know the word. They just feel very passionless to me. They feel like they really just want to take out your money. That's the end goal of every single mobile game. We don't have those fun portable games. We don't have those small RPG likes. We have Union Cross. I want you to think that there is a Kingdom Hearts turn-based RPG made by the creator of The World Ends With You that tells the beginning and eventual confrontation of the Keyblade War, and it is a free-to-play game where you cannot survive against the bosses if you don't manage to pull the OP JPEG. Or you cannot play it at all because it was discontinued. It is a dead game.
Story-wise, some people seem to like it, some others say it's a bit too exposition dumpy or too focused on the overall lore and less on the thriller itself, but I can play it, so I can say it. In the end, I don't know how popular this game actually was. There has been plenty of gacha games that came and went, noticing that maybe wasting God knows how much dollars in fucking PNGs in multiple games maybe is not a good idea. Anyways, Kingdom Hearts Union Cross Dark Road. It sure does exist. Existed in that matter. 2015. We had a new look towards Cage 3. It was still far off, but it was gaining some shape. They even announced that the last word included in the game would be that of Big Hero 6, meaning that every film after it wouldn't be included. But that was not the only announcement of the year. At Tokyo Game Show 2015, they announced Kingdom Hearts HD 2.8 Final Chapter Prologue. This was a direct continuation of the remasters 1.5 and 2.5 that would include the last game left to remaster during Drop Distance. But that wouldn't be enough to make a collection, would it? So, in Unreal Engine 4, they made Kingdom Hearts Key back cover, a movie which told some sequences and events of the mobile game in a more cinematic fashion, and a whole new game. And that game was Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a Fragmentary Passage. The collection was supposed to release in December of 2016, but was delayed a month or so to not be so together with the release of Final Fantasy XV. This is pretty clearly Osaka team's attempt at the formula of the original Kingdom Hearts games, one that focused more on the attack variations and less on the command decks that they've been working with for the last multiple entries, and to test that and share it to the public, they decided to make a short game out of Aqua's secret ending of Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. If you are expecting any meaningful revelation or character arc here, you won't receive it, aside if you really want to know why Mickey Mouse is shirtless in Cage 1. A lot of emphasis has been put in the combats and visuals. It's a game trying to capture more for the vibes and the capabilities that a modern Kingdom Hearts game can have with the new machines. Although some people criticize it, I did find this game to be neat. It doesn't run the best, and you can see pretty clearly how this is just inferior KH3 nowadays, but the minor scope and appeal of this game contributed to one of the most experimental design decisions I've seen in this franchise. But generally, as the series progresses, this title would be marked as the appetizers before the highly awaited release.
"2017 was a good year for gaming. Of course, you can name all of the games that you liked that came out of this year, but mostly I just remember this being the year that Kingdom Hearts felt like it was on the limelight again, mostly because of the remasters that finally came to PS4. They were not only stuck on a Hell machine, and they will later be ported to even more consoles later on. So this really did felt like the moment where Kingdom Hearts were the most accessible. This sort of marked the slow process of sort of taking out that image that I think a Dream Drop Distance gave to Kingdom Hearts. And then June came in. You know what that means, baby? Yeah, that's right. E3 2017, baby! Yeah, it sucked. I generally do not remember any of the conferences. Like, the worst Need for Speed were there, and I think there was a Spider-Man trailer. And what do you mean they released a new Kingdom Hearts 3 trailer?
Well, it wasn't out of nothing, it was released during the Kingdom Hearts Orchestras, but they smartly announced right in June. And it was an amazing trailer, one that showed how much more done the game seemed and looked compared to the previous trailers. And the ending of that trailer said that there would be one more in July at Disney Expo, announcing a new world. A Toy Story world, finally making its first appearance in a Kingdom Hearts game, and at the end of that trailer,
it was delayed.
But in less than 2 years, KH3 would be released, with its rollout and production finally starting at full force. The Osaka team plus a lot of the people at Final Fantasy 15 came in to help make the game. But there was also another party that came in to help, and that was Disney.
Obviously, this series is also from Disney, and they have been helping consistently with the marketing, scenario, production, even in the portable games. However, KH3, using the Unreal Engine 4 and having a bigger scope, necessitated more careful development throughout its many assets, which resulted in Square Enix calling Disney to help share their 3D resources and knowledge. There is this very good article by IGN here where they really talk about how it is working with Disney nowadays and how they help them share, their expertise in 3D animation and the models. I think one of the most interesting things about that article is how Nomura mentioned that writing a story for these Disney Awards are more complicated nowadays because the creators of the movies are alive. And it makes sense, right? Of course the Pinocchio creators and the Alice in Wonderland probably were not alive in 2002, but the creators of Frozen, Big Hero 6, they could talk with Nomura, they could see what they wanted or not wanted them to do. Apparently, the main Disney studio did not want to change their stories, which is why most of the more faithful adaptations of the stories of the movies are the main Walt Disney Animation Studios, while Pixar was the opposite. They did not want Sora to just become a part of their movies, they actually wanted Nomura to write a new story with those characters. I could go way longer about this, but please check that article, go do your homework, it's a very good article.
But yeah, trailers started becoming constant, which at first was great. It was still so insane to see a mainline Kingdom Hearts game with modern graphics and designs. It took me a year to feel like this was actually real. However, a discontent was bubbling with time though. Although the rollout did include some interesting things, like the classic Kingdom minigames of KH3 being added to Union Cross before launch, the new song made by Utada, or the return of the Gummy ship, there was criticism regarding how much story was being spoiled in these trailers. There are actually quite a few surprises and cool hooks in this game where they just decided to show you. One of the most infamous was the revelation that Aqua would be an enemy in this game. With copies of the game leaking a month before release, made a very stressful last couple of months for the rollout of this game. Finally, January 2019, for the whole wide world, Kingdom Hearts 3 was released. To whole worldwide controversy, KH3 was indeed received. What they expected to receive and what they received depends on who you ask. It's not that there weren't any controversial Kingdom Hearts games or ones that people weren't so hot about, but Kingdom Hearts 3 was another level. It is Kingdom Hearts 3. It is one of the most legendary, highly awaited games of the 2000s. How could it be disappointing? Well, it was to not an insignificant amount of people. Every single decision of this game had a passionate discussion, especially inside the KH community. Although the negativity was the most present and popular opinion, Kingdom Hearts 3 always had very strong soldiers and they seemed to only grow with time, especially after the DLC. We got a bit of a post-depression KH3 launch. After waiting years to see Sora, Donald and Goofy together again, we took some time to actually assess how we felt about the game. Some months later they even released in a free patch the critical mode, KH's infamous super hard difficulty, which didn't help at all how people felt about the game.
Although I can't say I really like Kingdom Hearts 3 nowadays, it did take me a while to fully enjoy that game. I felt like for the first months after it released, I felt a sort of unintentional emptiness.
Rumors of a DLC were going around at the time, and it came to be true, as in June of 2019 they announced KH3 Remind, a big DLC expansion to the game and the first one of the series, which released on January 2020, alongside the free update that gave new abilities and Keyblades to Sora. This DLC was weird, but a very cool weird. It is separated in 3 parts, the titular Remind, the limited cut episode, and the secret episode. The first section, Remind, is a sort of continuation of the ending, allowing to see another side of the story and playing with other characters. Limited cut episode tells what happened to these characters 1 year after the ending of the game, and they remade the Data Organization 13, those secret bosses of KH2 Final Mix, now having their KH3 counterparts. And finally, the secret episode, the epilogue that prepares you for the next episode of the series. Remind was absolutely well received with the public, although with some caveats. First off, the beginning of Remind takes its name quite seriously, as an unignorable chunk of the DLC is fighting against repeated bosses and enemies you already fought in the base game, and the data battles, the highest level of challenge this game has to offer you, was locking your story axis, alienating the casual audience of the game who were extremely interested in seeing how the game would end. But aside from that, the actual new content, the bosses, the story, the abilities added through the patch were all universally beloved by the community. I cannot stress how much Remind improved this game.
Which gives me the question, how? They were working in the series for years, they were always received a lot of controversy topics and opinions, and then suddenly they made one of the most beloved Kingdom Hearts related things ever since KH2. Like, how does that happen? Well, I'm glad you asked. I got no idea. I watched the credits from Kingdom Hearts 3 and Remind back to back, but they're the same. Like, they're the same people. And I don't know. So all I can do about this is theorize. And I want to be very clear about this, that there is not any proof about that. Like, generally the most believable thing is that the Osaka team just woke up. But I want to share my little theory. So, do you remember those development departments that they made after Square merged? You would imagine that yes, after 15 years they changed, and the most significant change happened in February of 2019, a month after Kingdom Hearts 3 came out, where in a call with investors, president of Square Enix Yosuke Matsuda said that after a disappointing team, after letting go of Crystal 2's Luminous engine and that whole Final Fantasy 15 era, the company was interested in completely changing its internal departments for the coming year. Similarly, they did not want to fire anyone, but they fused together the many different teams that they had, ending up with only 4. They were all named the Creative Business Unit. Creative Business Unit 4 is mostly focused around mobile games. Creative Business Unit 3 is the one responsible for Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn, and also people from Dragon Quest Builders. Creative Business Unit 2 entails the responsible for Dragon Quest, Octopath Traveler, the Bravely series, basically everyone for Enix and those old school JRPG titles. And of course Creative Business Unit 1, responsible for the main Final Fantasy games and the Kingdom Hearts series of games. So, does this mean that finally the main Kingdom Hearts studio were working on KH3? I don't know, because the Osaka team, although the name that the community and even Nomura himself gave to the studio, they were always considered part of the first development department. They technically were always considered part of the first department ever since the remake of Chains of Memories, in which they made alongside the original creators of Kingdom Hearts. I believe that now that Final Fantasy XV released and the company were better structured in general, now there was a bigger communication between the old Kingdom Hearts development team and this new one, the Osaka one. And Remind was made specifically in this transitional stage for the company. It's the first time we actually see Creative Business Unit 1 together, technically. Although this is just a theory. If there were new people, they weren't credited, and I don't know how much they impacted prior to the release of Remind, don't take this theory of mine as gospel. Once again, I think the only way for us to know that is when Osaka team make their next game. Speaking of next game,
in November of 2020, Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory was released. If you're surprised, it was also announced like 5 months before releasing. Melody of Memory is the first KH game to not be an RPG. It is actually a rhythm game by the director and studio who made the Theatrims games for Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. This idea was pitched to Nomura by director Masanobu Suzui, who was quite eager to make a KH rhythm game ever since 2015, but Nomura denied because he didn't feel like there was a story justification for the events of this game to happen. After some push from Disney itself, who was interested in the idea, Nomura found a place in the story and in this Zero made the game alongside the development of Kingdom Hearts 3. Melody of Memory, or as we call it, Mom, was probably the mildest received KH game ever since Recoded. In the sense it just kinda came and went. There were several reasons as to why it didn't really stick the landing, one of them being the cardinal sin of being unimportant to the overall story. Even when you stop looking at these stories with a more functional eyes, it still fails to be the insight towards Kairi that the game alluded to be. Aside from that, this game came out in November of 2020. It was deep into the pandemic, which made a lot of people, go insane. Even though it was a good year to be a gamer because everybody was at home, so online playing and interaction were at its peak, gaming as a whole were looking forward to the release of the Xbox Series and PlayStation 5, which released literally in the same week as Melody of Memory. The fact that the game didn't receive any DLC whatsoever let it pretty clear how this felt more like a cute idea that took way too long to make, rather than being something everybody was actually passionate about. A pity, because I do think Shimomura's best works should be treated with a little more care. 2021 was probably the quietest year Kingdom Hearts ever had. Which may sound surprising, like those Kingdom Hearts 3 days were still pretty bad. But I think ever since 2002, there was always something happening, you knew that one game was being made, there was a portable game, there was a mobile game. We had nothing in 2021. We actually lost the game being Union Cross that got its final update and ultimately shut down in May of 2021. Which was the only topic of discussion for the community. Because there was nothing. We knew nothing
It was so quiet, in fact, that you felt like you were in a dark room with no one around but your toys, and only with that little spark of fire that ignites that imagination of what will happen next. And Super Mario was there.
After years of begging of what seemed an impossibility, Sora was in Super Smash Bros., side to side with the many video game legends that inspired its creation.
And the internet reacted with passion. And this just seemed impossible prior to that frame. I mean, it's Disney, right? They're the perfectionist Dumbos. They wouldn't like their IPs being shared everywhere. Oh wait.
In an unprecedented event of destiny, what led to this conclusion was a chance meeting Masahiro Sakurai, the director of the Super Smash Bros. Series, had with a Disney higher-up at an award show, which they managed to bring the idea to the executives of Disney. And they accepted the proposal, because having your fan favorite character in the best-selling fighting game of all time could bring some benefits, so they pushed Square Enix to accept it too.
But the one guy that made this whole process harder was this guy called Tetsuya Nomura? According to the man, he was the one being very picky and undecisive about Sora's inclusion, which really confounds me. Quoting the official translation from Game Informer, I thought it would be tough to pull off because it might clash with the established lore in Kingdom Hearts and the Disney worlds, so it was an opportunity I had to consider very carefully. I think I understand what he means, in the sense where he really likes everything in his stories and his characters to have a sort of a bigger justification, a story connection. His suspension of disbelief is very particular. Things can magically happen and connect in seemingly abstract ways, but there has to have a source, I feel. I think he's bluffing. Disagree with me all you want, but like, I don't understand how can that be complicated. You can create a justification for Sora being in Smash very easily. Like, it's like the Winnie the Pooh world where he cannot go towards that world with he can go into that world with Donald and Goofy, which is why he's alone in there. Like there. It's that easy. I'm that shocked because I'm just kind of mad that this great moment almost didn't happen. And what an incredible moment. I passed this reaction video from Super Wii Bros to also pass a point, which, although I can prove with articles, I want to express through sheer noise. But something changed when this trailer came out. I mentioned before how I really felt like Dream Drop Distance had a very negative effect on the reputation of the series, and although the remasters and the release of KH3 did help take a little bit of that off, it was still very present, especially because KH3 was so controversial. But when this trailer came out, I felt like there was a positivity imbued in the community and in the name of Kingdom Hearts. I never seen so much appreciation towards Kingdom Hearts ever since ever. And Square Enix were pretty smart. Actually not totally, but they quickly announced the 20th anniversary event right after the trailer. This is a pretty common type of conventions in Japan. They usually do this to sort of commemorate, the anniversary of the franchises. But it really isn't place for announcements and... What? After people started sharing that in the internet, what followed were an extremely intensive night for Westerners trying to understand what the fuck was going on and what the fuck did that poster meant. And finally, they made the announcements.
The final chapter of Dark Road, the expansion focused on Xehanort, a new mobile game following the events of Union Cross called Missing Link using elements of augmented reality, and finally Kingdom Hearts 4. But that will be a story for another day.